Hello, Telvani here, and today GGG released the Lake of Kalandra expansion reveal. We saw a lot of big changes coming to the game in this new league, and if you haven't watched the announcement yet, I'd highly recommend checking out the official release. One of the biggest changes a lot of players noticed is an increased difficulty of Archnemesis rare monsters and an indirect nerf to Headhunter and Inspired Learning. Chris Wilson announced that the number of rare monsters from League mechanics will be significantly reduced in 3.19. The stated goal of this change is to help balance Archnemesis. He used the example of Abyss, where currently the number of rare monsters could be roughly 8 times that of a regular encounter. GGG, however, is buffing individual rare monsters to compensate for this change. All rare monsters and maps will now have at minimum 2 Archnemesis modifiers as opposed to a minimum of 1. In addition to this change, rare monsters will now be able to spawn with up to 4 Archnemesis modifiers instead of 3. What this will most likely end up meaning is that rare monsters are less common and more difficult. So if you thought killing Archnemesis monsters was difficult last league, I'd expect a much higher level of difficulty this time around, as you will be far more likely to see nasty combinations of modifiers on rare monsters. This is going to make it very annoying early game, as rare monsters and maps are going to be much more deadly, and I'd expect to see a lot of players using more portals early on. Sure, it should make League mechanics like Blight and Breach less rippy. However, in general, I'd expect the difficulty of your maps early game to increase, League mechanics withstanding. On the flip side of things, in the end game, when you have a Headhunter or Inspired Learning, I'd expect this change to reduce the number of monster modifiers you are stealing. Especially on the Inspired Learning side of things, this is a significant change, as less rare monsters will mean far less modifiers that you are able to steal. For Headhunter, this nerf is offset a little bit, but not entirely, by the increased number of modifiers on rare monsters. For example, if we assume that League mechanics are being reduced from perhaps 8 times more rare monsters down to 2 times more rare monsters when compared with regular mapping, and we assume that you are stealing roughly 1.5 times more modifiers on average from an individual rare monster, we could see as large a discrepancy as a 60% reduction in modifiers stolen in 3.19 compared to 3.18. Now before you freak out, this is obviously an absolute worst case scenario, and everything is subjective to the amount of scaling back that GGG decides to do. For example, if GGG reduces the number of monsters from League mechanics by only 50%, and factoring in the base number of rare monsters within a map, we could see a reduction of modifiers stolen by Headhunter down by, say, only 10% of its current value. Regardless of what happens, however, any reduction in the number of rare monsters will be a direct nerf to Inspired Learning, as the unique is limited to 1 stolen modifier. Hello, Telvani from the future here. After reading the Archnemesis portion of the patch notes, it is clear that with the removal of the Valley of Darkness keystone, Headhunter will be significantly worse in 3.19 compared with what it is currently, as the chance for a 4th modifier will not offset the drastic reduction of rare monsters throughout the game. Another thing to keep in mind is that GGG has changed Beyond. This was another big source of rare monster juicing for Headhunter and Inspired Learning, and this League mechanic is now apparently gone. They've replaced it with spawning Scourge monsters instead, and they've significantly reduced the amount of rare and unique monsters spawned by this mechanic. When questioned about the impact of all these changes to Headhunter in the Q&A with Ziggy D, Chris Wilson responded with this: "We can't balance the entire game around Headhunter." And while I agree with that statement, developers can always buff affected items based around changes made to the base game. Hopefully, GGG can strike a good balance between early game difficulty of individual rare monsters without overwhelming the players with a swarm of rare monsters, as well as balancing endgame power of iconic items like Headhunter and Inspired Learning. As always, we'll need to play the league to see just how impactful the stated changes are to the game, and make sure that we the players are giving meaningful feedback early and often. Anyway, thank you for watching, good luck with your league, and I'll see you in the next one.